Welcome back, friends, to the Marc Claire Show. My guest today wears a few hats, you could say. He is a comic book publisher and creator. He's an ex-military veteran, an ex-Disney animator, and he is the host of the Paranoid American podcast. He is Thomas, the Paranoid American. What's up, Thomas?
What's up, man? Thank you.
Sure thing, man. And, I think the best place to start, you're a comic book guy too, so I just guess would like to know a little bit of your origin story. How did regular Thomas, normal Thomas, if there ever was one, become the Paranoid American?
You mean the Paranoid American as in likes comics, or the Paranoid American as in being paranoid 24/7?
Whichever one came first.
It was probably the comics. The comics definitely came first. I don't think I was paranoid until I found out. Are there kids listening right now?
There could be. I can't tell any parents what to do, but
well, I
would say let loose would be my advice, though.
Okay.
Go for it.
I found out Santa Claus wasn't real.
Oh.
So once that happened, I think maybe, and I'm only maybe 50%. I don't even know how much I'm kidding about that anymore. It used to be like a funny segue, but now I really do think it might have been the first time that it was like my parents are in on it, my grandparents are in on it, everyone I know and love is in on it, my teachers, and like literally everyone in my life was in on this big, massive conspiracy. And a lot of people, when they hear conspiracy, they think of like a smoke-filled room and people are going to take somebody out, and that's fine. But I heard a quote. I don't even know the source of it so long ago, but it resonated with me, and that's if you really look hard enough, and depending on how paranoid you are, your parents planning a surprise birthday party could technically be a conspiracy. And like hearing that actually snapped me back into reality at some point. But I would say maybe that was the origin of the conspiracy. And then I had unbridled access to the internet in the mid-90s, and there was impossible to just surf the internet with no parental supervision and not come away a conspiracy theorist. So
what were the kind of things you were stumbling on? Unbridled internet access in the 90s. I mean, I was on the internet in the 90s, but it felt very bridled, I guess you could say. I was doing the AOL, logging in and waiting for my mom to get off the phone kind of thing. How unbridled was your internet browsing exactly?
Well, a lot of people didn't even realize this, but back in the day, even if you just had AOL, there was either an option, there was like something you could do that once you were connected to AOL, you could just minimize AOL and open up Netscape and then access the real internet and not that walled garden that was like that inner AOL browser. A lot of people didn't even realize that for the longest time.
I thought that was the internet.
Well, you and a majority of AOL users, they just thought that whatever you logged in and it was like, welcome, you've got mail. And then you've got like the 8 categories. The 8 categories plus the chat rooms, most people were like, that's the internet. That's what it is. And they never really saw the, GeoCities and the Alta Vista sites and all this other stuff. So once you got into that realm, that's what I mean by unbridled. And I mean, like, yeah, we had AOL and my parents had it. Only my mom used it, but she didn't know that there was like this outside internet outside of AOL. And even if she did, I remember at one point she put like a parent lock on the computer. And I just installed the keylogger and I ran it and I found out what her password is and I logged in and I put the child lock on her account and I took it off of my account. And then that was the last
little bastard, huh?
That was the last time that there was ever any passwords or checks, because it was like I own this computer. Like I'm letting you use it.
All right, so I probably was doing this in like the mid 2000s by the time I was on what you might call an unbridled internet, running into 9/11 conspiracies, that sort of thing. What kind of conspiracy stuff were you finding in the 90s?
A lot of it was Jordan Maxwell related. First of all, I hadn't even heard of Alex Jones until the late 90s, and that was through his public access show when I was in the military. But in the mid 90s, a lot of the conspiracy theories was lots of MK Ultra mind control related stuff. Also at this time, there was like this perfect point in the 90s where the cannabis cup had, I think this was like 97 or something. I'm just going to throw random numbers out, but it was in the late 90s. The cannabis cup was like conspiracy themed. High Times was conspiracy themed. X-Files was out. There was a show called Nowhere Man. There was Next Edition. There was just like a nonstop onslaught of all of these, everyone's lying to you, the government's lying to you, and just the regular mainstream culture of the 90s. it was kind of the in thing to just not trust the government and to just always assume that there was like something shady going on, like the Faculty movie and all these movies where nothing is as it seems. It just felt like it was the norm to be into conspiracy theories. Now, it was at a very superficial level, but it was there. And I think the biggest one was sacredtexts.org. I'm pretty sure they existed in the mid to late 90s as well. So I came across Secret Teachings of All Ages, and with a name of a book like that, it was hard to not just be immediately kind of drawn to that. So that was, I mean, it was like dipping your toe into the nice, warm, shallow end, but that was kind of the foray. That was the origin story.
I'm just thinking what my life would be like if I could travel back in time and like show my teenage self how to unlock the real internet. Because I mean, I turned out pretty weird as it is, but I mean, if I was getting into those deep dark corners at that age, I don't know. How did that early interest in the sort of unknown, the conspiracy world, how did that influence sort of your creative endeavors from there?
I was obsessed because I knew that trying to say this kind of stuff out loud, you sounded like you were crazy, and not the good kind of crazy, like the maybe you can't live by yourself or hold a steady job or maybe even clothe or feed yourself kind of crazy. So, and I realized there was like this turning moment when I really realized this is what I want to do, and it was, believe it or not, it was this interview between Jon Stewart and Tucker Carlson. And it was when Tucker Carlson had, I think it was Crossfire. Anyways, they had him on there and they were criticizing him, and Jon Stewart dropped this blow, and they were basically saying, you can't stand up for your beliefs, or you can't back this position you're making. And Jon Stewart basically threw this line out of like, dude, the show that follows mine are puppets making prank calls. And it was like a mic drop thing. And it was a very disingenuous way of like weaseling out of having an answer. But I do remember too, at that exact moment, I was like, oh, that's right. Like, being in comedy gives you this cheat code where you're allowed to make really extremist, maybe very political opinions. But when someone tries to criticize it, now what they're doing is they're criticizing a comedian. And like, now you look like an asshole if you criticize the comedian. And it felt the same thing, that like, if I can take this complicated research and things that I really do believe that I know sound silly and people will just want to, criticize it or, make it seem like it's silly. If I just make it silly off the top, like turn it into a comic book where people are doing silly stuff. Now, if you want to criticize it, like, you're the asshole. And it felt that
You're
was
attacking an
the
artist
seed.
now.
That was kind of the seed of it. And at the same time too, I mean, I was deep into art. I was doing animation anyways, but it was lots of just like abstract stuff, or I might doodle something. And then I just realized, hey, why don't I take everything I'm doing, these random little projects that don't have like a cohesive end goal, and what if I just focus everything that I'm doing creatively on, explaining and illustrating and making music of conspiracy theories? Like, that will be my lore and my muse. Like, I won't write about, grand battles of the Civil War. I'll talk about MK Ultra, and I'll make that my thing. And that's kind of where it started, and it's still going today.
And where along in there, I know you kind of had a foray going through Disney. Where along there did you sort of end up kind of finagling your way through the mainstream?
I mean, I feel like I was in the mainstream before that. I mean, I joined the military. That's pretty mainstream, I guess, depending. And then when I was in there, even like I was basically moonlighting at a recording studio, and I really wanted to get into the music industry. And I found out the hard way that having a military career and working in the music industry aren't necessarily the most cohesive career fields. Like, they don't necessarily intersect in ways that lend to each other. So but that was kind of like a big step into kind of the commercial mainstream world too, because I was working with MTV, VH1, working with some artists, like big artists that were on like Universal Records and Sony Records, and I had a few placements on some big projects. And that was actually kind of when I realized, like, I kind of hate the mainstream. I hate that this is how it works, and the answer was always like, hey, that's just how it works everywhere. And the payola was real. That one hurt the most because it always felt like a fake conspiracy that someone wanted to just complain that their crappy music wasn't getting any play. And then I saw payola just blatantly happen so much in front of me. It was like, damn, this really sucks. Like, I know artists that are legitimately good, and now this crap's going to get out there because the manager, bought some DJ a jet ski and some coke, and now that guy is going to get big. And that was just the story over and over and over again forever. So that kind of turned me off of the mainstream music in one of many different things. That was kind of like one of the straws that broke the back, but that was an aspect of it. And that's also, I was like, screw it, I'll just take the music and I'll just focus on things that wouldn't get popular anyways. I know that there's not going to be a popular song about MK Ultra or Pizzagate or whatever. So let's just make that and put it out and see what happens with it.
And so I'm curious, going back to sort of, you mentioned a lot of surface level conspiracies when you first started getting into this stuff. And I think for a lot of us, it might start off that way, where you just kind of see interesting things and you kind of get it into your headspace and you don't necessarily dive that deep or even know exactly what's real and what's not. But is there one along the way that sort of woke you up to the sense of like, this is one, like, oh my God, I can't turn away from this one. I have to keep diving deep because this is where there's something real going on.
For me, NLP was a huge one. For whatever reason, I really love the concept of mind control. And I also was like a computer programmer from an early age. Like before I even knew what I was doing, like I just found an affinity towards computer programming. And I saw NLP, and for everyone who's not familiar with this one, it's neuro-linguistic programming. It's kind of turned into like a crappy sort of like high pressure salesman tactic thing, but really at its core, it could also be like a self-help type of thing. But it's like a way of specifically phrasing statements and the way that you structure your sentences and even the way that you deliver, essentially rhetoric, like the skill of rhetoric that's no longer taught in schools unless you go to like a debate class. But this whole entire field of NLP, I saw it work on me personally. I remember exactly what it was. It was a TV show with Darren Brown, and I think it was on BBC or Channel 4, and he was having an interview, and he was asking, Simon Pegg, I believe, and he was asking him to come in and had like a 5 or 10 minute conversation. At the end of the conversation, he asked him, "What do you want for your birthday?" And without hesitating, Simon Pegg and me in my head both said a bike. And I remember thinking like, that's so weird. Why? Okay, maybe it's just a coincidence. But then I was like, well, why did I say bike in my head? And then Darren Brown walks backwards and he points out all the things that he said. He points out that as they were driving Simon Pegg to the place to meet, they drove by a bunch of bike shops and they had like lots of wheels spinning. And then the language that Darren Brown was using, he kept saying things that sounded like he was about to say bike, or he would say, for example, he was like, maybe you want a BMW or an Xbox, but the way he said it was like, maybe you want a BM or an Xbox, and what you hear is BMX, and all like add a whole bunch of those to it, and at the very end, your brain just heard bike repeated like 100 times without saying it. So there's part of your brain that just wants to put those pieces together and say bike. So when someone's like, okay, now what do you want? So this is like a very specific anecdote, but that for once I was like, I was literally just brain controlled while I was cognizant of it. And now that you're showing me how it was done, like now I understand exactly how you did it. And wow, that's crazy, because anyone that doesn't get this and isn't watching this and understanding it doesn't realize how easy it is to program someone within the span of 5 minutes. Because even in the TV show, even if it took them 8 hours to film that, it only took me like 5 to 10 minutes to watch it, and it worked on me too. So that was a big one.
That's you sitting there knowing they're trying to like do something to you. You're sort of part of a thing to prove something. So in some way you might have natural resistors that are up, but even with that, it worked just like that. So imagine extrapolating that to all the advertising, all the movies, everything that we're seeing every single day. It actually makes you think how much of what I want and desire and crave is actually from me. How much of it is just the brainwashing that's been being pumped into me.
90%, if we have to put a number on it.
Mm-hmm. And that neuro-linguistic programming too, I've been on sounds like a weird thing to say. I've been on a kind of a cult kick lately. I've been watching like a lot of cult documentaries, and that's something that comes up very commonly. I think it was a big one that they used in the Nexium cult, which really did start off like a business cult, as all of these things start to do. And for me, I was actually in a business cult at one point, like 15, 20 years ago. I didn't know what it was until I kind of like, heard about them saying something on the internet. Then I looked them up on the internet. Then I kind of had that, oh shit, I'm in a cult. And then I left, but very like minor level stuff. Like I think they were just trying to get me to sell stuff. I don't think I never got to the sex cult part if there was, let's put it that way. But I mean, some of this stuff just goes really deep. The Nexium stuff, it blew my mind. I kind of knew about it vaguely, but to see it work, you always think like, oh, I'm too smart for this stuff, or successful people aren't going to fall for this stuff. But I mean, Nexium could pull in very successful actors, producers, and basically just brainwash them into just working nonstop for this cult.
I mean, cult's a charged term. I feel like there might be good reasons to join what other people consider cult. Although in my mind, there's one thing that designates like a true cult, and that is the sex part. And that's that like everyone's got to be banging the top guy, and then he eventually stops all the lowers from banging who they want, and then he gets first pick. And that's when I think you're like officially in full on cult status.
Okay, well, I never got there.
Right, and so at that point, like you're just the lower level Masons, right?
Mm-hmm. And so, as you learned more about neurolinguistic programming, did you start to sort of see its role in not just like the media you saw out there? Did you actually were you able to see it in any of the projects that you had worked on in your professional career, whether it's going through Disney or whatnot?
Yeah, definitely. Although I don't know if I would consider every instance of it like, oh, that's NLP, because I think NLP was some nerds modeling successful patterns of natural behavior. And what they did is they compiled like an entire index of here's all of the successful and, like the most on an average ways to get what you want in social interactions, or to convey a message in the clearest way so that you get the result you want. And it's just like a little hand guide. But that doesn't mean that anyone that does the things in the hand guide like went and studied all that stuff and now are using it intentionally. Some people are just born with the gift of gab. They're just naturally charismatic. And what NLP does is it kind of breaks that down into formulas. And that works both ways, because I also feel that there's some people that are born with the complete absence of gift of gab and have the exact opposite of charisma, and they just end up being antisocial. And in those cases, NLP can almost be something that can neutralize you. It can bring you at least back up to like evil playing field, or even then some, especially if you understand the dynamics behind it. So maybe like is somebody that is naturally charismatic and that could sell you, an ice to an Eskimo, as the saying, is that person any more or less nefarious than someone that couldn't have naturally done it but studied NLP and then does it? I feel like they're both the same person, even if one had like a preconceived intent, right? Like premeditated sales. Is that any better or worse than someone that could just sell something to you on the spot? I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's the same.
That's an interesting way to look at it, because I mean, when you think about it, is there really that much of a difference? I mean, where is the line between manipulation and just charisma? And maybe the actual elements of what makes that up are pretty much the same in the end of the day. Maybe it's just the awareness of whether you're doing it, or maybe it's if you're the intent, like you mentioned, if you're intending to manipulate someone and deceive them with the way you're utilizing it, then maybe that's something we should look at negatively. But if it's something you're using to level up your game and sort of make yourself charismatic and get yourself ahead in life, then maybe it's just a tool and we can look at it either way.
Well, let's say that you're at like a party, right? And it's like, okay, it's just average party, nothing's hopping off. And then all of a sudden someone walks into the room and the party explodes. Like they know the right thing to say, they tell a great joke, like all this. And then like they become the center of focus for a brief moment in time. And like, okay, guys, I got to go real quick, blah, and they leave. You might be like, man, that guy is charismatic as hell. But what if you found out, theoretically, that they sat down and they rehearsed that thing like a Nathan Fielder skit, right? Like they sat down and they rehearsed the perfect party entrance, the perfect antidote, and then
they might have done it
the
wrong
right time to leave, and they left. They rehearsed that whole thing 50 times so that when they did it, it felt natural. Like, would that change your? I guess it might change your impression of him. You'd be like, well, this guy is insane that he practiced it. But at that moment, that first impression, it's still like the results is all that mattered in those cases. So that's an extreme example of where, someone did that. But what if they rehearsed it 3 times? Just because they were a little bit nervous. Now, is that nefarious? Okay, what if it was 20? What if it was 50? What if it was 100? What number of times of rehearsal or premeditation does it become creepy or abnormal? Like, it feels arbitrary, right? Because whatever you say, if it's 50, that could be like, well, it's not 49. And then if you're like, okay, maybe it's 30, I'm like, well, it's not 25,
Today's episode of the Marc Clair Show is sponsored by right here, Fox & Sons, foxandsons.com, my favorite coffee brand. And I don't just say that because they're sponsors of the show. I say that because I get a 1-pound bag shipped to my house. The proof is right here. Every single month, I get my pound of Fox & Sons delivered right to my house. You should too. Of course, I don't expect you to just dive right in with no idea what you're getting into. I want you to go get yourself a sample bag. Go over to foxandsons.com, foxnsons.com. You can check out the Den Blend Dark, as is my preference, the Tanzanian Peaberry, Brazilian Honey Premp, a bunch of other flavors still to come. Steven's always mixing it up with new, fresh beans. The best part about this business, Steven started it to not only relive his love for sharing coffee with his father, but to teach his own sons about entrepreneurship. If that doesn't give you the warm and fuzzies, I don't know what will. Just kidding. Yes, I do. This coffee will. So head over to foxandsons.com, foxnsons.com. Use discount code MCS to get yourself 18% off your order. You're going to be coming back for more. Trust me. Foxandsons.com, discount code MCS. Back to the show. And either way, if all this fictional guy is trying to do is be the life of a party and maybe fix his social awkwardness, and he has to rehearse a little bit to do that, I don't really see what the harm is in that case. So when we're talking about the end goal of make a party fun or have a good night or whatever. So I suppose it really just comes down to the end goal itself. Otherwise, like you said, it is kind of arbitrary. It is just whatever you or I in any one moment think, oh, well, that's wrong because this guy spent time figuring it out, and this guy was born with this kind of charisma.
Yeah, and then I guess the next progression from that is the pickup artist culture that was also big in like the early 2000s that kind of bled into and cannibalized on the NLP crowd. But you take that same aspect and apply it to like the dating world, where there would be guys that would be, again, like there's a line, right? Like if you practice this exact same line 50 times over on various people, just waiting for it to hit, kind of crafting. But it also feels a little bit like how a stand-up comedian might work a bit out. The very first few audiences they throw out, like maybe nothing lands and they don't really understand the joke themselves. And then after a certain point, they realize which ones work, how to read the room in certain ways. So it's the difference between if someone just has like a shortcut and they can immediately become efficient at doing this kind of stuff versus like slowly, organically putting it together. And it's hard to say that one's nefarious and one's not, regardless of intent.
So we got here because you said this was one that sort of pulled you in a little bit further and that you really dove into too deeply less. So is that kind of where it led you into the idea of mind control and MK Ultra and that sort of thing?
Well, this was like, okay, this is real even at a very simple level, like a TV show. This is what they admit.
This is what they have fun TV shows about,
Right, and it worked within 5 to 10 minutes. So if that's possible, maybe there's something more to it. So then I got really obsessed with Darren Brown and NLP, and then that led to some of the originators of NLP, which is John Grinder and Richard Bandler. I even did an actual NLP training course with Richard Bandler. By pure coincidence, it was running like walking distance from the apartment I was living at here in Orlando back like 20 years ago. So this got me deep, and then he admitted that he had trained the military, and he does that to like, hype himself up a little bit, like, oh, I've trained spies, give me another $50 for this extra class or certification.
Right. Be the next Jason Bourne.
And it was true. And then what was like the Men Who Stared at Goats had come out somewhere around there too. And this is where the intersection for me kind of ends, is like once they would start saying you can like stare at a goat long enough and it explodes, or you know, you can like move things with your mind. I lose a lot of interest there just because I've never seen anyone do that. And I feel like there'd be a PT Barnum out there that would charge you $10 to see somebody do it. And the fact that there's not means that maybe it's not as possible as someone thinks. But all the stuff that did work, I was fascinated with. And then it was a lot of the MK Ultra research gets into, okay, all of that NLP, now add drugs, now add torture, now add sleep deprivation, and add all of the weird stuff that only the military could get away with, like the psychic driving and the enforced, you know, giving them experimental drugs. And then it was like, okay, this makes sense. And yes, there's probably something really crazy that you could do to somebody. And I think I got really deep into like the programmed assassins and the RFK assassination and JFK and anything that was like a MK Ultra, you know, mind controlled assassin. I obsessed over that particular topic for a really long time. So that was kind of like the big entry point.
Well, I can see how that particular topic would, you know, make you pretty, get you pretty in deep, because it's one of those that you run into almost literally no matter what topic you look into. If you're looking into assassinations, political assassinations, if you're looking into serial killers, if you're looking into cults, you're going to keep running into these same intersections with military intelligence, with MK Ultra, with psychedelic experiments. All roads tend to lead to the same place with a lot of this stuff.
Well, yeah, secret societies are nothing more than old versions of intelligence agencies. It's pretty much all they were. And then when you get into psychedelics, secret societies tended to have a complete monopoly over psychedelics and drugs of any kind, even today. I would make an argument that the CIA has far more control over the drug trade than most other organizations out there, probably even including the DEA. I don't know. So yeah, a lot of the times, all of this stuff leads to the same angles. And then this also perfectly layered on top of me going through the military, because when I went through boot camp, that was another big, like, in my face, I'm seeing it happen before my very eyes type of, I accept mind control, brain programming. I mean, those words sound a little inflammatory, but anyone that's been through boot camp would probably be like, oh yeah, of course that's, you know, brainwashing. Of course, that's exactly what that concept is. But to see people like literally break down and stop making rational decisions for themselves and just immediately go into, I'll do what I'm told because nothing else I'm doing is correct. And that's one of the very first things that they do in boot camp, is they teach you that you don't have the capability of making your own decisions. So if you think you should have turned left, someone's going to yell at you and say turn right. And then if you turn right, someone else will yell at you and say turn left. And they'll just keep doing that until they can almost see a visual change in like your posture and the way that you emote and everything. And it's like, okay, we got that one, move on to the next. And you could almost see it happening assembly line style. Like, oh, they're going to go after that guy because he's puffing his chest out a little too much. And sure enough, so I mean, seeing that kind of stuff in action was another big one of like, there's like, this is real. This concept that I've read about and seen in X-Files, and like snapping your fingers and somebody goes from a jovial, well-informed person to just an absolute robot that walks over and punches somebody, like that 100% exists, no question in my mind. Now, how would you do that? And that's where the rabbit hole got deeper.
At some point, did you start to kind of realize like, oh, wait, all the stuff that I saw in, like you said, the X-Files, all this media that I've been seeing, that it's actually portrayed as science fiction. It's portrayed as kind of on the verge of being somewhat absurd or somewhat ludicrous, something that couldn't really happen. And then as you sort of dive into these little, you keep, again, running into these things. Well, wait a minute, the X-Files did an episode about that, or I saw this on this other show. At some point, you realize everything that I'm uncovering has actually already been presented to me in some way. And I'm curious, like, how you sort of wrapped your mind around that as you started to see it.
I mean, you figure out really quickly, too, though, that it's like more boring than the TV show version. So, like, the X-Files one, it's always like some really hard evidence, like they find the alien in goo inside of this vial somewhere, or they like meet the girl and they see her shapeshift into a doppelganger. Like there's always this very definitive proof, see Scully, and then she's always got a way to weasel out of it. But in real life, you never really get that. You like the best that you can really come up with in proof is just like a really strong hunch based on these like 8 books and maybe this article. And at any point, someone could just be like, yeah, but those books were all fabricated, or those were all written by, some spook or whatever. And it all kind of crumbles. And that's sort of the closest basis that any of us have on any of this. And also maybe awkward segue, but this was like the premise for my first comic series ever of Time Samplers, because the idea was that you could never prove any of this stuff unless you somehow had like a time machine to bring somebody back and be like, look, here they are doing it. Here we are in the middle of a Skull and Bones initiation ritual. Here we are at at Jekyll Island as they're signing the Federal Reserve and talking about how they're intentionally doing this to bankrupt the country and all this. So that was one of the first things. I was like, well, if you can make a comic, and a comic is a vehicle to show something that would be impossible to do or very expensive with all the 3D and stuff, like that's what I want to do. I want to do that thing where you bring people back in past and you say, look, they're doing it right now. There, the conspiracy's proven. Let's go to the next one. And I just wanted to make a comic where they just Bill and Ted expose conspiracy theories back to back to back.
Conspiracy Bill and Ted. I haven't seen that one. I am looking forward to Chaos Twins. It's not that awkward of a segue because I wanted to get into this, and let's just go there now. Why don't you describe a little bit about the project that you've been working on with Sam Tripoli? I already have my order, my Indigo. I think it's Indiegogo, right? I already have that my in place. But describe a little bit about how you guys came up with the idea for this particular book and what people can expect from it.
So the long story short premise of this is that we just wanted to make a comic book that would be readable by kids and their parents and have something for both of them, and also kind of edge towards, having more critical thinking and it just not leaning towards mainstream at all. So for example, it's got reptilians, it's got the concept of people being brainwashed and not understanding what's going around unless they like really try and understand it and like do their own research. But at the same time, there's like no profanity, no over-the-top violence, no crude humor. So it was a little bit out of both of our wheelhouses in that way. Like we want to put dick jokes and everything, and we want to always make like the offensive joke to kind of, get a laugh or shock somebody. But this is a completely different approach to that, where it's like if this information and these concepts really have as much merit, they don't always need to be draped and kind of like over the top and stuff. And this is also, in a good way, it's like the normalization of accepting cryptids and conspiracy theories as like, a normal thing. Again, like bringing back the X-Files concept of like that 90s where it was almost mainstream to be a little bit distrustful of the government. And I feel like we've gone 180 degrees from that in a lot of ways. So Chaos Twins was the very first sort of sample dipping our toe into that, and the response, as you could see, was like absolutely overwhelming. I'm gonna have serious paper cuts, and I'll be like boxing comics up for the next month or so once we get them all printed out. But obviously, people want this. They definitely want to see more. And I don't know if it's just Sam Tripoli and Paranoid American, or if they really want to know, more about kids that are interested in like this sort of like a Nancy Drew meets X-Files. I think that might be a good, like really simple elevator pitch for this, but there's a ripe audience that really wants to see this kind of content. So we've got a huge number of them coming out now, because the original concept was to make an animation. And I was like, well, let's slow down, and animations takes a lot of time, and you got to do all the character development. You got to get some storyboards together. And there's a really good way to kind of have a middle ground where you work on a comic first, establish the audience, make sure that the characters are fleshed out. And then once that hits, then turn it into an animation. Well, it only took one issue and we're already working on the animation for it now.
Sweet. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Why don't you go ahead and get that plug in now? We'll continue the conversation, but so we don't forget, and because people need to hear it, where can they go find that the campaign?
ChaosTwins.com, and whatever state the project's in, ChaosTwins.com will bring you to where you can get a copy. Right now it redirects to the Indiegogo page. The initial campaign raising is over, so now you can basically pre-order a printed copy. You get an exclusive sticker, all that good stuff. And then for everyone that got a copy, while it was running. You get extra stuff. You'll get some extra prints. If you got a signed copy, Sam's going to be flying to Florida, where I'm based out of, and signing all those on like a little live stream, and we'll do a bunch of shout outs and stuff. So we're going to definitely make it into like a whole event. But yeah, chaostwins.com is where you can find that book. And even if you're watching this in the future, hopefully it brings you and you can buy like all 6 and the DVD and the animation and the stuffed animal and tickets to the Chaos Twins theme park. We'll see.
The link will always get you to some shit, is the point.
Correct.
Cool. Well, something you mentioned earlier about kind of how it was almost becoming like normal in some way in the 90s with shows like the X-Files and things like that to sort of question things or what have you, or think the government is up to something. I feel like we're in a very interesting time now here where, I think I first got into this stuff with like the Art Bell, then the Bill Cooper kind of edge of things where I didn't know anybody that had ever heard of these guys, or I didn't know anybody who listened to Coast AM or any of this stuff. But now I feel like my dad has heard of Alex Jones, like it's a very strange time where a lot of this stuff, and now I think maybe more than ever, yesterday there's a live stream with like Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, and you're just like, what universe is this? This used to be where I had to go, I literally used to listen to Art Bell like on an actual radio, like late at night with the lights off. And it just seems like things are, I don't know if mainstreamed is quite the word for it, but I guess where I'm trying to go with this is that the more that this kind of conversation gets mainstreamed, the more I kind of distrust a lot of what I see. And I wonder if you see that at all, how much you see of conspiracy narratives, how much of them you think are being controlled in some way? Because the more I sort of zoom out on things as someone who's, I guess, been, enthusiast, I don't know if enthusiast is the word, but someone who's been into this stuff in some way for close to probably 30 years now, I look back on a lot of stuff, a lot of rabbit holes that I went down. And I just think some of it looks like, was I just meant to spend a bunch of time on this? Was I just meant to be distracted by a lot of this stuff? And I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Maybe. I think the entertaining aspects of it you were supposed to be distracted on. Like good examples, like if you get really in deep into the culture, the whole predictive programming or revelation of the method, the lesser key of, one of the lesser keys of magic, where essentially it's either that revealing the people what you're going to do ahead of time through TV or whatever, frees you of the karmic debt of doing the action itself. I like that as a philosophical idea. I don't think that there's any merit to that. I would doubt anyone actually believes that. Then there's also other aspects where they're just not very creative. And when I say they, fill in the blank. I don't even know what the they would be. But this is another interesting aspect of it, is because when you say the they and you imagine that there's like this, some individual, let's say Bill Gates has ultimate control and he can destroy you. To me, that's the closest that modern man is going to accept a new mythology, like where it seems unrealistic for anyone to come out and just start inventing new gods out of nowhere and have them taken seriously, right? So even like all the over the top explanations of stuff, you have to relate it to what people already know. But conspiracy theories in my mind are sort of like this new mythology. The whole like JFK was maybe killed by aliens. Maybe it was by the mafia. Maybe it was by the CIA. We'll never really know. Who actually knows? Maybe it could have been an interdimensional thing. And then there's a line from, I think it's a Peter Levenda book. I hope I don't get that wrong. Sinister Forces, but it's like in between pages and it just says, was the Kennedy assassination a particle or a wave? And to me, that's like chef's kiss way of trying to explain this, because it sort of conveys that idea that conspiracy theories really can be this new mythology. Like I'm going to go out on a limb and make a grand assumption. I don't usually like to say absolutes, but I'll say I don't think a lot of people believe in Medusa and that there was a real lady that turned her hair into snakes and she could turn you into stone.
I'm fairly open to it.
You might be open, but I don't like, if you did a wide, poll, I feel like it would be a small minority of people that believe that. Accurate. Yeah. Now, if you took that same poll and said Hillary Clinton can turn into a shape-shifting reptilian, she eats babies, I feel like you'd get more people that unironically would say that they do believe that. And to me, there's not a lot of difference between those two things. The only one is that one is silly because you're talking about silly stories from 3,000 years ago, and the other one's about a real person that I know probably does that in real life. And it's like, how is that not just a modern version of Medusa, but everyone thinks that we're so scientific and rational that they don't connect those dots. But this is the closest that we come to this. And it's the same thing where someone's got their finger on a button, or someone's commanding like all of the blue umbrellas and cars to not set on fire when there's a natural disaster. And like, to me, that, I mean, this is Zeus throwing, lightning down from the skies because you've angered him in some way. That's NASA and using HARP to burn down, a village or something so that Oprah's got more room. I equate them to similar things, but I also mean that in a less condescending way, in that I think that there's enough truth to them that they warrant looking into. Like, I don't know if Hillary Clinton actually like grows green scales and whatnot, but she might be able to shift into like a cold-blooded mode and then snacks on a few babies. I don't know.
Perhaps. And maybe that is the way to look at conspiracies, kind of like our modern mythologies, because look, maybe, and this is the way, I mean, I think when we grow up learning about Greek mythology, Roman mythology, most of us look at it as just silly stories. I think now I look at it as silly stories that might have some reality to them, and there might even be Medusa-like creatures or whatnot that were around back then, or something close enough that they kind of were onto something and had the right idea. And maybe that's the deal with the conspiracy world. Maybe there's a lot of stuff we just can't really know the details because we are not the time samplers. We can't go back and literally sit in the room in Jekyll Island. We can't go back and literally figure out if JFK assassination was a particle or a wave, but we can see enough and we can piece enough together that it sort of weaves through as this modern mythology. And I do wonder how like our modern day conspiracy theories are going to be looked at down the road, like how things like JFK, 9/11, if they're going to be looked at all. How do those get weaved into? Are they seen as crazy stories from the past, or are they seen as the mythology of the times that they look back and question how we were filtering things then?
Well, they'll have way more context, maybe, unless there's like a huge EMP and it just wipes out all storage and it's back to things that were just written. But to take that concept that you're mentioning to like some kind of a funny logical conclusion, but imagine 1,000 years from now, people are digging up the remains of America and they're like, it's weird, this culture, every November they would get together and worship this bird. They would do these sacrifices to this turkey, and they might consider that everyone had some sort of an affinity to like the bird of the turkey, and that maybe we venerated it and had stories about it just because they're going to find all this like turkey symbolism from Thanksgiving decorations and stuff, right? But really, how many people that celebrate Thanksgiving and turkeys are actually ever venerating a turkey or thinking about a turkey or dressing a turkey up like a pilgrim? That's all sort of like these weird things that evolved around the culture that kind of hint to it, like these weak symbols that don't really represent. Like if someone just showed you a turkey wearing a pilgrim outfit and you didn't understand all the concept of it, that symbol is almost meaningless to you. So there is a very real possibility in the future someone's like, oh yeah, Americans, that was that country where they like worship turkeys. We haven't figured it out yet, but they worship turkeys, and you'd laugh a little bit, but we think back like, oh, that's that culture that like worshipped bulls, or they worshipped, this animal. Some people have made the case like, oh, they worship cows, and it's like, oh, they've always done that. Well, maybe someone just read that one day and thought that they meant literally worship a cow, and then they started doing it, and other people started doing it, and to maybe jump on a tangent that I think makes this point too. This concept of like the sacred mushroom and the cross. I don't know if you ever heard of like John Allegro's work and stuff, but
with it, yeah.
Long story short, Santa's a mushroom, Jesus is a mushroom, Holy Grail's a mushroom, everything is a mushroom.
Everything's a mushroom, right.
But I think that there's some validity to that too, because they make this case that in modern day, like in the Catholic Mass, and they have the transubstantiation, they turn the Eucharist into the body of Christ, and they have similar rituals in other religions and cultures across the world. But there's a theory that originally that Eucharist was a highly potent psychedelic, and that it was such a coveted thing that only the priests knew about about it, but they kept that secret so hidden so well that at some point, like someone didn't pass it on to the next guy in line, and they were just like, well, crap, I remember them always having these like white things. Let's make a cracker. Let's make, we'll make it out of bread and start giving it out. And then it's like, what would be the difference between going to church and getting a high dose of psilocybin versus going to church and eating a cracker? But if people convince themselves, well, that's just how it's always been done, they might be missing that like a really big component that got taken out. So I don't know. Hopefully that conveys some of the point. I know it was a tangent.
Yeah, well, the show's all about tangents. I was actually laughing before because I was thinking about, I'm one who will see like, these Graham Hancock documentaries, and they'll see them, worshiping the snake god, and they'll say, well, he'll never go as far as like there was actually a snake god or something like that. He'll just say there were advanced humans. Maybe I'll go as far as like, well, maybe there's a snake god. I don't know. Maybe there's some weird snake creature. But now I'm just kind of laughing like, I don't know. Maybe they were just having their version of Thanksgiving and they fucking ate snakes, and I'm the one making it into a whole thing about snake gods. I don't know.
Yeah, but there's also something to be said about taking those traditions like the turkey with the pilgrim and stuff. The reason why that symbol is potent is because it's like over the top and it really like drives it in, and it's almost like a mnemonic device where like you see it and it's like, oh yeah, pilgrims and turkey and that's what we eat. And then sometimes it's got the buckles on the shoes and you're like, oh yeah, Mayflower, okay. Or like, so it reminds you of all these different components. But yeah, if you're from the outside looking in, you might not realize that snake has exactly 83 scales because that's how many villagers, were in the first plot of land, or who knows what all those intricate sort of symbols that might be lost to time at this point. I mean, like the Sphinx, right? Like we don't even know if there's even a record of the Sphinx real face at any point. And that could have had like the original Konami code or something on the front, and we would just never know.
Right. I'm curious sort of how you view some of the more absurd things out there. Like what are you talk a lot about various conspiracies, but I'm curious what you really think about certain things. Like, for example, you mentioned Hillary being a potential reptilian shapeshifter, hates babies. I know you're saying that somewhat jokingly and hyperbolically, but how much are you? What's the craziest thing you think could be true is sort of what I'm getting at.
So I'm not a huge fan of alien theories and stuff. I get also on the PG side, the craziest thing is that simulation theory. We're all just a simulation. You were actually just put here for my own entertainment. That made like Neo in the Matrix kind of thing. On the other end, I don't believe in shape-shifting reptilians, but I do believe in people doing incredibly extreme and horrifically sadistic things, even if they otherwise appear like a normal functioning person in society, including a high-ranking politician that might be bathing in blood and 40 minutes later on TV giving an enthusiastic, pep speech. So I do think that there's something to like the spirit cooking accusations, and I don't think that it has to involve black magic or demons. I think that there might be something to bringing yourself to the absolute brink of sanity, or just pushing yourself to absolute extremes that those that live in the top 0.00001%, that they might be either so desensitized, or they might almost see it as, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? If not someone with my resources and the ability to do these extreme things, like, if I'm not going to be the one that gets on the Epstein flight, it'll be someone else. So it might as well be me kind of mentality. Extrapolate that to the worst possible claims made out there. And I think that there's enough possibility that they're all possible. But if you talk about like aliens and shapeshifting and supernatural interdimensional powers and that, I'm not sure if I'm as on board. You'd have a harder time selling me on it, but I don't discount any of it.
Interesting. Have you ever had any sort of supernatural or weird paranormal-esque experience of your own?
No, the closest would kind of be like that NLP type thing, and also just absolute extreme coincidences. For example, and I don't know how, like, for me, I've got this rule, right? Like, coincidences probably exist, but how many would you be able to do in a row until you were like, okay, this isn't coincidence anymore? Like if you were flipping a coin and you got 3 heads in a row, do you think you're supernatural? What if you did it 50 times in a row? What if you did it 100 times in a row? At some point, you're gonna be like, there's either something up with me or the quarter or like the spot that I'm in. This is how athletes will like develop like their lucky jock strap or their lucky socks, and like they always wear the socks for this game because something happened that they couldn't explain consistently enough that they're just like, I'm gonna do this thing, and that's what magical thinking is in a big way. So I think that there's something to that aspect of it, but also that there might be something real behind all of it.
Is so that like, does that tie in a little bit to what you mentioned about possibly believing like a simulation type theory?
Maybe I don't know, because the simulation theory is it's like the ultimate conversation breaker in my mind, because the second two people both admit, yeah, we're probably both in a simulation, like what are we even talking about then? Like we're like, you know, like all our conversations are both simulated. They're all preordained. So we're just kind of passive observers in what we think is an active conversation. But a practical example.
Why would they program us to talk about the program?
Exactly. One of the like a practical example of one of these weird coincidences. There's been numerous times that I was just like testing myself, and I'd be like, "There's a dictionary there. I'm just gonna open it up to this word, like right on the page, everything." And it happened. And I don't know, like, and I wouldn't be able to do it every time, but it happened more than 2 or 3 times. And it's like, do I actually know, like, am I feeling the exact page out of this like 800 plus pages of thin paper? Do I actually know where this word was inherently and I just opened up to it? Or was it a coincidence? Or is there some other weird synchronicity going on? I lean towards coincidence, even on those cases, but whenever someone brings this up, that's the first thing that I think of, is like those more than a few times that I was like, I'm going to open up the word snake, and just on the first open up of a book, or not the dictionary, because you might be able to figure, okay, snake is going to be maybe in the middle towards the end. So just like, I'll open up that book right there, and I want to see the word, you know, bacon, and to be able to open it up and just immediately see the word on the first page you turn it to. I don't know. That's as woo woo as I get, and I know it's not seeing Bigfoot.
You've done that, then you've just randomly thought, I'm gonna find this word, and boom, there it is.
Yeah, and it was 100% part of magical thinking, because I remember as a kid too, where I'd be like, a bad example, but I'm like, I'm looking for my retainer, or I'm looking for my Game Boy, right? And I've looked freaking everywhere, and then I look over to like my desk drawer, and I think, oh, it's probably in there. Okay, I'll make a bet. If it's in there, then I'll go and like clean my room, or I'll go and do something nice for so and so. Like you're making these like little agreements, and it was almost like a mini version of like praying, like, dear God, if I find my Game Boy in that desk drawer. But it wasn't God. It was more of a magical language of the birds thing. And a lot of people do this without realizing it. But it's like, oh, I'm on the fence on whether or not I want to go to this party, and then like, it becomes a little bit overcast, and it's like, oh, that's a sign. It's a sign that something's not going to go right. Or like, you know, a big flock of black ducks will walk by. You're like, oh, that's a sign. I'm going to go back inside and not do that thing I was about to do. Like, none of these mean anything. It's magical language, but I think that's kind of the closest that I could speak to, is that like some of that magical language feels like it works for people.
And trust me, stuff like this, when it does quote unquote work, sometimes I'll just still be like, well, maybe I'm just telling myself that because it seems so mind blowing. My wife is Mexican, and she's she's into some woo woo stuff, you might say. But ever since I met her, she's always had this thing when we're missing something. This is the thing she's done all her life. She asks and prays to this like specific saint, like, can you please help me find this thing? So it's just something like she'd do now and again. If we can't find this thing, she'd be like, did you ask? Whatever. And so it honestly does work like almost every time. And the idea is, if it doesn't work, it's fucking gone. So then just let it go. And what the craziest time of this is, we couldn't find her to keep these car keys anywhere, and we're just like going nuts. Like, I know they were there, I can't find them. She's like, just ask San Antonio. I'm like, all right, I'll do it. I sincerely, because I really wanted to find them. I'm not joking. And then the idea is you got to like forget it and then go look, and you know you'll find it. I'm not joking. We did this, and before we could even move, the keys fell from the fucking ceiling. They just fell out of the literally, just like there was nothing. We were not near any top shelf, anything that it could have fallen off of. They literally just emerged out of the sky, like, and fell on the floor. It was the weirdest fucking thing, because there was just no way I could rationalize where they came from.
if that happened one time, then like you might think about it a lot. If it happened 10 times, you might be like, okay, there's something to this. So that's where my mind usually go. Like I've had a lot of those 1 or 2 or 3 time experiences, but maybe not as many where I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna quit my job and recluse from society and just ultra focus on how my keys just fall from the sky and figure out what there is to this. So I haven't gone that far into it. But that's the close. Yeah, being able to open a book directly to a word is the closest that I've got to like an alien abduction or a Bigfoot encounter story.
So interesting. So, what like inspires you to do that? Is it just a random thing that I'm so fascinated by it? It makes you want to like try it right now. But what is this a random thing that you think to do for no reason sometimes?
It's usually to like make a decision for it. Could be stupid as like, should I make a salad or a sandwich? And it'd be like, you know what? If I go and I open this book up and I do this, or if I, if it's an even page, I'll do this. If it's an odd page, it's just like a funny like game of like divination because I don't really believe in divination. But it's the equivalent of flipping a coin. But when you do things often like that, I don't know if you ever read Prometheus Rising by Robert Wilson or Robert Anton
I'm aware of it. I haven't read it.
So the whole book is basically a whole bunch of mind experiments, and one of them is that you tell yourself that you're going to find money on the ground. And you just tell yourself that. I'm going to oversimplify it, but you just constantly tell yourself you're going to find money and to just constantly look at the ground. And more chance than not, you will find money on the ground. And the book is making this point of like, are you manifesting the money on the ground because you're putting so much focus and intention in it? Or maybe you're just now aware of your surroundings way more than you normally are because you're thinking money and you're looking. And normally you might not even look down, let alone be thinking to look at something. Like you might even walk by it, see it, and not realize that you saw it because you weren't thinking to see it. So I personally lean towards the latter. I think that it's kind of like the law of attraction or whatever. It's not that you're attracting something out in the universe through some mystical energy, but you are telling yourself on a conscious and subconscious level, pay attention to the things that would get me to this goal. So it seems to happen more often. But the premise of that particular mind experiment in Prometheus Rising, I think, is to poke at that line between the two of like, are you manifesting it or are you just using that as a way to make it more available to you and it was already there? I don't know. It's also a little bit woo-woo.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's woo-woo either way. I guess a little less woo-woo if you're just looking at it as I'm just adjusting my perspective and adjusting my framework and the way I sort of navigate the world, and therefore I'm going to see things differently. Or you can go as far as like, my mind just controls things and manipulates the simulation or what have you. Thomas, you mentioned how you don't really, believe in too much of this, like the alien stuff or interdimensional or whatever, but I'm sure investigating various conspiracies and whatnot, you always run into people that do. And by that, I don't just mean like other conspiracy people. I just mean like even in the official investigations and the CIA and whatnot, you always run into these things like these experiments, like what you talked about, the staring at codes experiment. Do you think that even if you don't think this stuff is real, that to me, what I think, I don't know what's real, that's what I think, but what I see is there are certainly people in power who either believe a lot of this stuff is real, a lot of the crazy stuff that they do is real, like Jack Parsons doing the Babylonian workings and before launching rockets, shit like that, or they act like they do for some other reason that I don't know. But so I'm just curious your thoughts on whether that stuff is real or not. There's clearly a lot of people in the government, in secret societies that act like it is. So do you think it is? Do you think it's because they really are accessing some dark sort of other side of things, or what do you think their motivation is, and why do we see the common thread no matter where we look?
Well, if I focus on the Jack Parsons thing first, I do think that Jack Parsons was tapping into something. Okay. I don't know if I would agree that it was like an alien entity or that it was like an evil demon or that they made a real homunculus and Marjorie Cameron came to that. I don't know if any of that was true. But there is a very interesting overlap between whatever Jack Parsons was tapping into and his buddy at the time essentially was L. Ron Hubbard, right? And L. Ron Hubbard then taking that and creating a very successful movement out of it. And just like NLP, having like all of the auditing sessions and all of the techniques that they allegedly teach you in the high ranks. I know this from like exposure
auditing
docs
is
and
kind of
stuff.
like it's like NLP plus sci-fi. It's like NLP, but there's aliens in your brain.
Well, and there's also a lot of like interesting mind control related aspects of that too, where they train you how to not react to something, or at least try to get you to not react. And that includes don't get mad, don't get sad, don't get happy, don't laugh, don't cry.
Because then you're letting those thetans control you, or
yeah, at 100%. Yeah. But if you could see that whatever the end goal is, okay, it's we're purging your body of thetans, but what we're really doing is we're training you to know how to suppress emotions and sort of like jump into different personalities. And you can kind of see why that in particular is so popular with actors, because that's kind of what actors do all the time is, don't cry. Okay, cry. Okay, now be mad. Okay, now be happy, and just be able to do it like you're putting on a hat and taking it back off. But to wind back, so we got this to Hollywood and Scientology through Jack Parsons. The other aspect of that is like if there's all these people that believe in aliens and dark entities and all this, I do believe some of them believe in that, and I'm not here to discount it. Although my skeptic hat, again, it goes to P.T. Barnum, where I feel like there would be a modern day P.T. Barnum on TikTok that's like the next person to tip me, 1,000 carat coins. We'll make this ghost do the next person in the super chat will make the ghost do a dance. The ghost will do a TikTok dance or something. And as silly as that sounds, I 100%, I really, truly, unironically believe that capitalism is such a strong force that there'd be someone out there pimping a ghost on TikTok for likes and shares and, buy the t-shirt. And the fact that there's not even been one with the advent of everyone with a camera in their pocket and everything, like someone would have a Bigfoot strip dancing on OnlyFans at this point, if there was a modicum of a possibility that they were out there. And then when you start getting into this kind of rationale, the explanations tend to be like, oh, well, they're interdimensional. They just phase out of existence.
It is funny you say that, because I noticed that somewhere around 10, 15 years ago, when we suddenly everyone had, this great cell phone cameras and whatnot, suddenly everything became interdimensional.
Yeah. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, a ghost won't show up for an iPhone because that's a digital camera.
They're Samsung guys. So
right, yeah, the ghosts are Samsung guys. But I almost guarantee that someone probably also said that about like the Polaroid when the Polaroid came out. Like, oh, you can't do that with a Polaroid. You need an old, like daguerreotype or something, and it'll go back. And there'll probably be in 50 years, someone will be like, oh, you can't get ghost pictures on your whatever your Neuralink because it's too advanced. But you could if you had an old like iPhone that my grandpa had.
Right, an old iPhone.
So like it's like this shifting goalpost that the technology we have now is always too advanced for the ghosts, except for in 50 years when it'll be like the only thing that would have worked, but no one's got the working parts anymore. It's the same thing too with like the ghost, the spirit boxes and stuff, where it's like, so you're telling me that a ghost now needs to understand how to manipulate and like, if I'm a ghost and I want to talk to you through the FM radio, do I have to understand how FM works now at this point? Do I have to understand a Fourier transform?
Do I have to go to like
all the math
radio engineering school now? In ghost world?
That's the best explanation I've heard of, because how else does a ghost just know how to manipulate? The Ouija board I get, right? You move this thing, there's the letter.
That I can believe.
Like, what if it's encoded? Do you think that a ghost could like, infiltrate in like an encrypted radio wave and still make I don't know. It gets a little bit silly into that aspect, but that's usually, I like to poke at the seams, right? Okay, what if all this is true? Then what? And again, if someone throws out, oh, well, it's interdimensional, you won't understand. Oh, it's spiritual, you won't understand. Oh, there's this explanation. Another one I'll throw out there is like a lot of the flat earth or the Tartaria or the ancient kingdom stuff. I don't completely discount that everything in history is a complete lie or fabrication, although there's a huge burden of proof to back that up. But the other one too is it feels like this ultimate cheat code that if you just say, yeah, well, Copernicus never existed, Aristotle never existed, Socrates never existed, anyone that's ever written about anything pre-1800 didn't actually exist, all that's fabricated. if we all agree on that, and it's like, okay, now what? Like, do we have to reinvent the wheel? Do we have to figure out if cavemen existed? Like, how far do you extrapolate not believing anything at all you're told or anything that's been written? And very often that doesn't extend to religious books for silly reasons.
Well, yeah, and I think it's like the logical end of following so many conspiracies potentially, if you could find yourself in a place where you just don't believe anything and life becomes meaningless. And I've seen this happen. I've seen versions of myself in the multiverse that could have gone in those paths. Luckily, I don't feel like I quite got there. It doesn't seem like you quite got there either. It seems like you have a pretty good level-headed attitude about these things despite the moniker. So Thomas, please take this minute now. We're going to head into the smoke-filled room, and I have some other topics I want to pick your brain on. But before that, just let everybody know how they can find your show. Again, plug the book. Anything else you got going on, feel free to plug away.
Yeah, everything's at paranoidamerican.com. If you like comics, it's all there. You can also search Paranoid American on Amazon. I've got coloring books, graphic novels, table books about MK Ultra, all kinds of stuff. There's a book about Nazi werewolf chemtrails. That's a real thing. It's a real chapter in that book. Also, I've got crazy stickers. I've got custom toys. I've got music. If you want to listen to a song called Adrenochrome Queen or Clinton Body Count, you can find all of those on Spotify right now. Seriously, if you just go on Spotify and search Adrenochrome Queen, you can listen to that. So there's a million different ways you can get brainwashed by my content, my programming. But yeah, go to paranoidamerican.com and all other roads will lead from there.
Man, I want to go listen to that so bad. I'm not even sure if I'm ready to go into the next segment yet. I think I got to go listen to that first. I'll try to wait. But Thomas, it's been awesome talking to you, and I really want to encourage everyone to check out your work and check out Chaos Twins because I'm looking forward to seeing it myself.
Thank you, man, and shout out Sam.